Hey guys, Jeffrey from Headstrong Training Systems here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the squat. In particular, we're going to be looking at how your center of mass, so basically your starting position, how we can manipulate our center of mass and how that can affect your squat movement pattern and the biomechanics of that movement pattern. Now, when we get right into it, when we're talking about your starting position, center of mass, I'm talking about how you're applying force into the ground and your positioning from your starting position. Because right now, if I was just standing here, you guys can tell that you guys can probably feel that I'm able to sway forward and I'm able to sway backwards. So I'm able to shift my body weight and shift my center of mass in a forwards direction. And when I go into a more forwards direction, I become more toe dominant. Force starts to apply in that forward direction, or vice versa. I can also apply force backwards. I can become more heel dominant and go in the opposite direction. Now, when we talk about applying foot pressure and applying center of mass and creating our base of support, ideally we want to always be cemented over our midfoot, where that way we have equal balance between the forwards and the backwards direction. But what we also need to consider is sometimes our femur lengths and how that can impact the direction of force, or how far forward or how far back we should be. Now, what I mean by that is your femur length, so from like say your hip socket to your knee joint, that's the length of your femur, which is basically your quad. Your femur has a set length. That length, that doesn't change. So from that range of motion, when you're in this standing position going down into the bottom position, your femur has a set length that it needs to travel. You can't shorten that length and you can't increase that length because that's the length of your femur. But what we can do is we can manipulate how much forward travel occurs, or how much hip travel backwards occurs with that femur, based on our center of mass and our starting position and where we apply force from. And now you might be thinking, now, why might one want to do this? And so the reason that someone might want to do this is if they need to adjust the biomechanics of their squat. If they're currently very hip dominant and they feel that there's a lot of stress on their back, they're not getting much knee travel, you might then start to shift your center of mass to put yourself into a position where you then become more knee dominant, take stress off that back, and vice versa. If you're right now, you've got a lot of knee displacement occurring, you might be getting some knee pain the deeper you go, and you need to find a way to constrict yourself so that you become more hip dominant. Then by shifting that center of mass, that can also play a role in taking stress off the knees. Now, the reason that changing a center of mass, either shifting it forward or backwards, can have effects on affecting how much knee travel, hip travel we have, is because essentially you're changing your starting position. And what I mean by that is, we know we have a set length that the femur needs to travel. If, for example, I have my center of mass way behind here, so this is obviously an exaggerated sense, but if I move this starting line where my hip is, if I move this starting line back, and so if you can imagine that normally my starting line is further up from here, but now I've moved it back, now there's an extra displacement, extra range that the femur now has to travel in order to just get back to that starting position. And so because that starting position has been moved back, now we've shortened the amount of knee travel that occurs. And vice versa. If, say, this is our starting position around the middle of our foot, so directly in line, if I shift this starting position forward, now I've essentially shortcutted the ROM that was initially needed to get to this position by simply shifting my body forward. And now there's extra ROM, there's extra femur length that can afford to become more knee dominant. So how this looks in practice is basically right now, I'm going to perform a squat in this starting position where I'm directly over my midfoot in that center position. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift my center mass forward. And so now you see that my starting position on my hips has gone forward as well. And what that means is you can see that I get a lot more knee travel there. And so vice versa, if I now shift my center of mass backwards, move that starting position on my hips backwards, you see that now become a lot more hip dominant. So now what we're going to do, we're just going to take a side-on view, just so we can see a bit more clarity into the effects of changing our center mass and changing our starting position. So right now, this is my position in neutral position, directly over my midfoot. You guys can watch my squat pattern from the side here. So I've got equal knee and hip displacement. Now, if I shift my center mass backwards, become more heel dominant. So now I'm moving the starting position of my hips backwards into here. Now as I squat down, you guys can see I've got more hip dominance going back and less knee travel. The vice versa is true. If I shift forward, put more pressure onto my toes, be in that more lean over position at the start, you guys can see that now because I've moved my hips in that starting position forward, got a lot more knee travel there. So hopefully from that you guys can see the effects of what happens when we shift our starting position, shift our hips either forwards or backwards, and where we remain over that midfoot. So hopefully that gives you guys more ideas and more tools in your toolbox of how to play around with maybe if you need to shift your movement pattern of your squat, either take stress off the knees, take stress off the hips, etc. So that's all from me today, guys. Hopefully that's helpful for you, and I'll catch you guys next time. Take care.